our veterans, good morning.
Good morning.
Every veteran has a story to tell. I and my friend Helen Jones, who served as a lieutenant in the Air Force Army, are here today to relive some of our memories of World War II. Helen, I want you to stand. I want everybody to see this other veteran. December 7th, 1941, the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor was called the Day of Infamy by our President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The country was committed to that fight. That was 72 years ago, and many of us now living are in our 80s or high 90s, and we're proud of having served. I want to take you back now to how it was in those days, a time warp, so to speak, and I'm speaking primarily from my own experience at that time. We were all affected by the war, and we were asked to sacrifice for our country, and the whole nation was solidly in back of the war effort. At that time, I was living in Riverside, and there were several military bases in the immediate area. As both Riverside and San Bernardino are county seats, they're strategically important. March Air Force Base, Norton Air Force Base, Camp Hahn, which was a staging area then, but which is now where our Arlington Cemetery is located, all were in the immediate area. There was a flying school in Chino, where pilots were being trained in flying our P-38, the sleek flying plane before jets. The whole west coast of California was involved in some way in the war effort. Civilian life was really affected. First, there was the draft. All men had to sign up for the draft. They were given a draft card and a number, and numbers were drawn by lottery. If your number was called, you went into service. If you wanted to choose your branch of service, you enlisted before your number was called. All possible resources went into the armed services. Civilians were issued ration books with coupons, which had to be used to buy such items as meat, sugar, coffee, tuna, cigarettes, shoes, gasoline. The Riverside-San Bernardino Valley was vulnerable to attack because of our bases. We were required to have blackout curtains on our windows at night to keep the area in darkness so it could not be located by any suspicious air invasion. Any suspicious flyover would bring out the sirens and searchlights. I remember being held at the movie theater one night until the all clear was sounded. Our primary source of news was the radio and newspapers. There was no television. How about that? There was no internet. There were no cell phones. And there was no instant communication of any kind. We saw pictures of the fighting from newsreels at the movie theaters. These were often very much delayed. Most of our main source of entertainment was news, and news was from the theaters. We also were entertained by attending the USO dances and dancing to the music of the big bands. We lived in an atmosphere of fear and distrust, and though we were far from the fighting zone, this led to the internment of all people of Japanese descent, regardless of where they were born, their citizenship, their occupation, their profession, or standing in the community. They were rounded up with just a few necessary positions and sent off to relocation camps, which were often stark and uncomfortable, a kind of dressed up version of the term concentration camp, until after the war ended. This was a very dark blot on our history. In the winter of 1942, it was very rainy. Troops were being sent in primarily from the National Guards of the Midwest and were arriving to go into staging areas to be sent overseas. The orange groves were sodden with mud. Soldiers were housed in every available shelter. Churches, schools, auditoriums were filled with these fine young men. I've often wondered how many of them made it back home. California actually did have a few incidents of direct attack by Japanese submarine. One was off the coast near Cupertino, aiming at the oil fields in Bakersfield. There were also active attacks in the San Francisco Bay installations. We did not learn of the attack and occupation of some of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska until at the same time as Pearl Harbor, until after the war. 4 young women that I worked with went into various military commands to serve. 1 to the Army, 1 to the Red Cross, 1 to the Army Nurse Corps, and I went into the Navy. True, we'd had a few women serve in the Navy in World War I, but we were new to the Navy. The women that served in World War I were clerical workers called yeomen, and a few were Navy nurses that served on hospital ships. World War II saw women's roles greatly expanded. Our job was to take over the job of a man doing shore duty to relieve him to go to active duty to fight the war. We were called waves, and that means women accepted for volunteer emergency service. Girls enrolled in large numbers to free the men for the war effort. We were sent to boot camp, and it was tough. They were not soft on us. We spent hours drilling, marching, and learning how to take commands, learning Navy protocol, a history of the Navy, and we were given tests to determine where we could best serve. None of them then were sent overseas. Later, a few went to Hawaii as storekeepers, yeomen, and the hospital corps. We went to school to learn our job, and I was assigned to the hospital corps and spent 16 weeks in training in hospital work. And on graduating, our entire class was sent off to the to staff the Naval Hospital, which had recently been set up on Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay. Our patients were primarily sailors from ships in the harbor, and some were from Allied forces. We had a few patients flown in by Catalina flying boats from the battles of Tarawa and Wetak and Iwo Jima, and a few civilians came in as well. There was a flying boat repair base on the lee side of Treasure Island, and when they revved up their motors, our barracks would shake. We also had a school of tropical medicine at our hospital, training doctors for what they would find in treating their patients overseas. And I'd like to mention here that penicillin had just been recently discovered and was so rare that it was kept under lock and key at our hospital. There were other activities located on the island as well. I worked in the personnel office after they found I could type, and my job was to keep track of all the admissions, discharges, transferring of patients from ward to ward. The first year or so after Pearl Harbor, the war was not going well. We were losing. Fighting was very intense. Men were taken prisoner in the Philippines. Our Marines were slugging it out in the jungles and the beaches. Our cemetery at the Punch Bowl in Honolulu attests to so many of these brave men who died. Many others were lost at sea, some captured. The death march in the Philippines in Bataan was a great tragedy. Then the naval battles slowly turned aside after the Battle of the Coral Sea. I well remember the death of our Commander-in-Chief, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The news came by radio one April morning, and we were all just stunned. We later had our own memorial service on the base in his honor. When the news of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were announced, we really didn't realize the impact of the atomic war or understand the effects of radiation and the aftermath of this deadly weapon. But it brought us peace. 8 days after the first bomb fell, Japan surrendered and brought us victory. This was VJ Day, August 14th, 1945, which was a victory over Japan. San Francisco's reaction was incredible. Everybody was roaming the streets in joy. People came out of the shadows in the underworld, and it soon became apparent that rioting was starting. We were called back to the safety of the base for our own protection. We had a group of German war prisoners stationed on the base, and I remember them standing in stunned silence, realizing that the war was all over for them. But there were two victories. The other was VE Day, Victory over Europe, on May the 8th, when the whole East Coast celebrated not only the end of the war, but the liberation of all the prisoners of the horrors of the Holocaust. The high point to me, however, was when our fleet came home. All the warehouses of the Embarcadero in San Francisco were draped in red, white, and blue bunting. Fireboats with their whistles screaming and spewing streams of water raced out to greet that great battleship, the USS North Dakota, as it slipped through the fog on the Golden Gate. It was too huge to be berthed and had to be anchored in the stream of the bay. What a sight. There was a sign, a big electric sign, that was erected on Angel Island as you enter the San Francisco harbor, and it read, "Welcome home, well done." I was privileged to march later in the Victory Parade on Market Street. I was there when nations gathered to form the United Nations. I had done my very small part, and I was ready to go home. Some of the movements that came about from that great war were the women's movement, from Rosie the Riveter, whose work had added so much to the war effort. Women weren't content just to go back home. They enjoyed having a paycheck, and many women were widows who had to go to support their families. It also gave rise to the baby boomers, of which many of you are in the audience today. Yay for the baby boomers. Because we had all been children of the Depression, we wanted our children to have more than they had had. And this was all before technology, jet planes, air travel, and our present day high-tech world. It also gave rise to the GI Bill, which enabled many of our veterans to enhance their education. Coming back to civilian life is not easy. Suddenly, you're no longer on your own. You're no longer under orders or limits to your activities. I'm going to say, as Ed did, the price of freedom is very big. Freedom is not free. When I hear someone say, this is a free country, I can do what I want to ask them what they did to earn that freedom. You young people serving here today with the ROTC are doing a fine job of upholding the traditions of service, honor, and courage that keep our nation strong. You are our future.
Yeah, baby.
Thank you for the privilege of letting me tell my story and give a memorial to those that served so valiantly in that great conflict.
Go, Mom. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
Got a standing ovation. Oh my gosh.
That was the Reader's Digest version of World War II. Now, I usually don't ask a woman this, but in this instance, I'm going to do it because it'll make that speech even more amazing. Mary, how old are you?
98.
That's amazing, right? Now, I don't think I could have written that speech, and for us running for election this coming year, if she runs, I'm telling you, I'm not running. So. Thank you, Mom. I would be remiss in my introductions as I looked out over